really put together. This man has become totally fascinated with Austrian economics, and he also understands the way infinite banking concepts puts Austrian economics into action. His name is Carlos Lara, and he's been speaking all over the country about his passion for these two subjects. And so give him a big IBC welcome. This is Carlos Lara.
And thank all of you. Only an Austrian economist could have written this book. The way it reads gives it away. What it says and how it says it. Only an Austrian economist could have written this book. Austrian economists are classical natural law theorists, and they do all their arguing through verbal logic as opposed to graphs and charts. They shun away from economics being a science. They are classical natural law theorists. They rely on fixities. Gravity, the sun comes up and it sets. Ludwig von Mises was probably the most central figure of the Austrian economic school of thought. He did something that no other economist had ever done before. He took thousands of years of thinking and reduced it all down into one treatise, one book. It had never been done before. He wrote it in German because he was Austrian, and he called it Human Action, the science of human action. That people act purposefully in everything that they do, as individuals, not in the aggregate, but as individuals. Mises spent his entire life fighting an idea that was false. An idea that was false, delusional, and destructive. And he saw it as an evil. And he didn't want anyone to give in to it. Now, an individual like that comes along only once in history. When I read his works, he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about us and our kids and our grandkids. I was recently told that when proposing to his wife, he said, "You know, honey, I know a lot about money, but I'll never have any." And he did. He knew everything about money. The legacy that Mises left behind was an encouragement for all of us to join into the intellectual battle and defeat this evil idea. He said that we all had that responsibility to society, that we must all join in the intellectual battle. Now, his voice is silent now, but he was quoted as having said that false prophets cannot prevail against those with sincere conviction, common sense, and moral courage. What kind of courage? The kind of courage to stand out in front and tell the truth without fear. Sincere conviction, common sense, moral courage. All three of those attributes are in this book. Because those attributes belong to the author, the Austrian economist who wrote it. In fact, I ought to say that all Austrian economists point to the same thing. They go straight to the heart of the problem. They all have different ways of getting there, but they all go straight to the heart of the problem, and they have really basically the same solution. Rarely do I find Austrian economists disagreeing with one another. Now, contrary to the fact that Wall Street, the media, and all of our political leaders up in Washington were taken by complete surprise when this financial crisis hit last year, the classical natural law theorists have been predicting this mess for a long time. Decades. Now, because of the nature of my work, I've been speaking on the economy for the last 2 years. And in each one of my talks, I have stressed three main areas of concern. The first one is the destructiveness of Keynesian economics. John Maynard Keynes, if you do not know who this individual is, do yourself a favor and Google him up on the internet this afternoon. Get a complete bio on this gentleman. To his credit, he's probably the most famous economist of the 20th century. Dr. Cleveland just recently corrected me and said, Carlos, you know, he only had one course in economics. He was really a mathematician. But he was from a very aristocratic family, and he was bright. He was British, very well politically connected. And what this man did is he wrote a book in 1936. He wrote a book that literally turned economics upside down. Again, Dr. Cleveland says that in his book, if you read it, he made the prodigal son in the prodigal son story the good guy and the father the bad guy. That's how upside down it is. And yet, when he wrote the book, because our country, and in fact the world, was in a crisis, very similar to like what we're in today, this book took the world by storm. It was a solution to the crisis. Everyone was scared. The problem is that to this day, all of our foundational social, economic, political, and especially our monetary policy is still Keynesian economics. All of our universities from Harvard on down are vested in this teaching. We'll say more about Keynes in a little bit, but that's one thing that I always stress, the destructiveness of Keynesian economics. Next week, I'll be in Charlotte, where I'll be addressing a room full of commercial banks. Pray for me. The second thing I stress as a problem is the increasing intervention of government on the free market. Government is into everything now. I mean, I fully expect them to go into psychiatry here before too long. They are doing more than they were ever designed to do. And it continues to increase. It's just what Tom DeLorenzo said. In a time of crisis, they just get bigger and stronger. Third, the workings of the central bank and the fractional reserve banking system. Now, to put that in some sort of perspective for you, from the most simple to maybe a little bit more complex, we have to start with economics. Just what is economics anyway? Is it all these graphs, charts, formulas? It took me about 10 economic books to understand that economics is just about how to make a living. Well, 98% of the country has to do that unless you're extremely wealthy. It's how to make a living. And one of the things we have to do in making a living is we have to produce for ourselves and our families. And when we do that, we must economize. That's where the word comes from. What do we do when we economize? We set a little bit of what we produce back. What for? To invest it in some sort of a labor-saving device that will allow us to produce more. The three elements of production, you see, from an economic standpoint, are land, labor, and capital. Capital is equipment, labor-saving devices to produce more production. But in order to get the capital, the equipment, we have to have savings. That's so important to realize because, you see, the only reason our country's been able to get away with what it's been getting away with since the 40s, 30s, 40s, is because there was a savings base with all people. They save 10 to 12% of their income. That's all gone now. Folks, I even stumbled over this one because you see, at 62 years old, I was just born into the system. I got a job, started working, paying bills, getting into debt. But somewhere along the line, I start to realize that things just don't work out just the way I would hope they would. You see, and we're all in that same situation. We start to see that the system that we live under is flawed, greatly flawed. But all economics always teaches that we live in a world of scarcity, not abundance. Scarcity. That's hard for people in the United States to realize because they go to the grocery store and they just see all this abundance of food. They go to the malls, and there's all this stuff. You see, but we live in a world of scarce resources, and that's why we must economize. Another main principle of economics is private property. My goodness, this one thing is the closest thing to our freedom. Without private property, there is no such thing as an economy. There can be no market without private property. You have nothing to exchange. You have to own something in order to exchange it in the marketplace. We all know that we're losing our freedom because they keep taking away our private property. Our founding fathers, this is what they wanted government to do only, is to protect this. They're doing a lot more than that now. They're taking this from us. We are losing our freedom. Human nature. None of us like to work. It's inconvenient. We will steal if it's easier than work. Aristotle said if you don't understand that about human nature, that humans are flawed and limited, you're setting yourself up to be pulled away by utopian dreamers. So that's been in economics forever. We must always contend with human nature. Wherever humans go, whatever institution, they taint it. So these three principles always remember when we deal with economics. What is fiat money exactly? Well, first of all, the term fiat is let there be light. See, that's a declaration from a sovereign power. It's a fiat statement. Well, the sovereign power of this United States has declared this to be the only thing that we can spend inside our borders. This is the only money that we can use. It goes on, and they enforce this. If someone owes you a debt and you refuse to take this, that debt is cancelable in the court of law. He goes scot-free. It's important to realize this is all we can use. It's legal tender law. If we start to look at this fiat money, we realize that who does it belong to? Well, it belongs to the Federal Reserve. It's a Federal Reserve note, so it belongs to our Federal Reserve Bank. That's who prints this. It says up here that this note is legal or tender for all debts, public and private. But you all know there's nothing backing this. It's just paper and ink. Now, at one time, our dollar used to look like this. You see, it didn't say Federal Reserve note at the top. It said silver certificate. This certifies that there has been deposited in the Treasury of the United States $1 silver payable to the bearer upon demand. Now that to me is sound money. I don't mind carrying this stuff around as long as I can go to them and exchange it for this, a precious metal. Well, we've had fiat money in our country before. When in the infancy of our country, they came out with the Continentals, and they lost all of their value. Not worth the Continentals is what George Washington said, because he needed a wheelbarrow to carry all the Continentals just to buy bread for his soldiers. He complained to Congress about it. Again, you heard De Lorenzo say that during the Civil War, Lincoln printed greenbacks. Okay? Now, economists going way back, centuries back, would say this: if you have two competing currencies operating in an economy, say, for example, fiat money and gold and silver, the public tends to spend the paper and hoards the gold. Okay? So President Roosevelt, he realized this, and he confiscated all the people's gold during the 30s, made it illegal. He wanted only this money to circulate, not in competition with gold. Took all the gold. Can you imagine living during that time when you had to turn in all your gold and gold was illegal to use? And he sticks it all in a big vault out in Kentucky. But one of the things we need to know about this is that after World War II, the United States came out of that war as a victorious power, and they were already operating with only this as the money inside the boundaries, and they had so much clout with the other foreign countries because they were the victorious powers. They set international currency laws. And they basically talked all the other countries into using dollars as their reserve in their central banks and telling them, go ahead and do what we did. Make this paper the only money within your boundaries. But by using the dollar in your country as our reserve, we promise you that at any time that you feel a little shaky about the value of our dollars, we'll redeem them in gold. So, all the foreign countries at that time took the United States up on that bet. Because why? The dollar was good as gold for them. Now, as Nelson, I heard Nelson say this. During the Vietnam crisis, the value of our dollar really sunk to the same levels it sunk here recently. And so foreign countries started getting really worried. And so guess what? Because of that Bretton Woods agreement that was struck in 1945, they started cashing in their dollars with gold, and there was a large gold sucking sound leaving the United States. I think France took the biggest piece, so you see all this gold is leaving our country because of that agreement, and Nixon declared that agreement null and void on the spot, and then declared what Nelson said, we're all Keynesians now. Well, this is all that's floating out internationally, paper. That's it. Paper. You can start to see the fragileness of our whole situation when you realize that. What is inflation? All right. Nelson also said another important thing is how you classify things. Make sure you're classifying things correctly, because if you don't, you're liable to get confused. All right, now here is where I believe that a lot of the American public gets confused, is in the definition of inflation. And I know you have seen this before. I saw this in high school somewhere in one of my classes. But I always go back to it because I like the way it says what it says. He's saying basically that people just don't understand how money works. They don't understand how coin, which is money, works, credit, and circulation. And he uses that word, they're downright ignorant about it. And he's also saying this is what causes all the confusion and all the anxiety is because of the ignorance of this, okay? And when I start to see that it was said so long ago, I say, my goodness, there's absolutely nothing new under the sun, because isn't this what everybody's feeling right now? So there is a lot of ignorance about coin, credit, and circulation. Now, the thing about it is that it really isn't anything new. This has been going on for centuries. You can go back, what is this, 200 years, go back 500 years, go back 1,000 years. It's the same problem. Think about Rome. Everybody has seen pictures of Rome. All those magnificent buildings, the roads and the waterways, and that army. My goodness, the power and might of Rome. Thousands of soldiers with all that fine weaponry, bows, arrows, chariots, horses. My goodness, think of all the expense to keep that up. It must have been astronomical for Caesars. And in fact, it was. Because you ask the question, how did Rome get the money to pay for all of that? Well, that military, they'd go out and conquer somebody, and they'd take all their money, bring it back into Rome. They'd make those people They called them citizens, but they were really slaves, and would make them pay tribute, which is what? Protection money. And they did it with their own citizens. Every year, Caesar would send out his battalion of Roman soldiers to collect the tribute. And here comes all the gold at the end of the year of that collection. And he looks at it. And he looks over here, and he's got all these expenses. I've got to continue to build up my army. I've got to feed these men, these horses. I've got to build more roads. May want to even build a stadium. And there is never enough gold to pay those bills. Caesar has an insatiable appetite. So what does he do? He tells his treasury department, okay, here's what I want you to do. Take these gold coins and clip the edges of them. That's right, clip them. All the way around, just clip them. I know it's going to make that coin a little smaller, but you clip them, then melt down those clippings and make me more gold coins. So you see now he's got more gold. But you and I know what he just did. He's just defrauded this money, hadn't he?